to Ohio in a swarm of bees. I never married, but Ohio don't remember me. I still owe money to the money, to the money I owe. I never thought about love when I thought about home.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder. It's time to look in the mirror, America. Do you like what you see?
I keep referring to Obama as the magic Negro.
Do you like what you see now?
Well, suck on this.
It's just a mirror, America.
Shared sacrifice by everybody.
What could it do to you except reflect your image?
I did nothing wrong at the Minneapolis airport.
The Majority Report.
Far more credible to me than PBS and Frontline.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, September 14th, 2017. My name is Sam Seder. This is the four-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, senior editor from the Washington Monthly, former policy director and managing editor of New America's Open Markets program, Phillip Longman, will be here to tell us why it's time to fight healthcare monopolies. The day after Medicare for All is introduced with 17 co-sponsors in the U.S. Senate. Also on the program today, deal or no deal on DACA. And McConnell may nuke blue slips, paving the way for the most conservative judges we've seen in a generation, or the moon falling into Lake Michigan. Meanwhile, Mueller chasing social media, and the Flynns are in deep doo-doo. Trump's new ethics heads okays anonymous gifts to legal defense funds. Not so coincidentally. And Moochin Manuchin in some hot water of his own over his honeymoon ask.
Okay.
Oh, man. Michael's away. Matt will play. Pharma boy Martin Shkreli. How do I say his name?
I think it's Shkreli.
Jailed even before he's been sentenced to jail. And rest in peace, Grant Hart from Husker Du. One of my favorite bands back in the day. All this and more on today's Majority Report, ladies and gentlemen. So overnight, apparently late last night, Donald Trump met with Nancy and Chuck. And they hung out. And I guess they basically just said, I don't know, people will like you more if you support DACA. Some type of legislative fix for the executive policy that you rescinded. And he must have said, really? Do you really think they'll like me more? And Chuck and Nancy said, sure, yeah, of course. And he said, well...
Think of how big the propaganda file can get after
wow,
something like
okay.
that.
And then, but what about the wall? Because the wall is really important. It's not important to do. It's important to talk about, like I said to the Mexican president. And they said, well, let's do that separately, and we'll just promise more border security. Big border security? Yeah, big border security. Okay, deal. And here he is announcing it this morning after coming off of a helicopter ride. And just listen to this guy.
The wall will come later. We're right now renovating large sections of wall, massive sections, making it brand new. We're doing a lot of renovation. We're building 4 different samples of the wall to see which one we're going to choose. And the wall is going to be built.
Will you pause it? I mean, it's just amazing. First of all, the guy's lying, right? But aside from that, like, we're building 4 samples of walls. We're going to see which one we like best. What goes with the drapes, which goes with the couch, which goes with the picture. He has to say this. I mean, because we know this from the transcripts of his conversation with the Mexican president. He knows how important the wall is to those guys wearing baseball caps in that stadium in West Virginia, or that, that auditorium in West Virginia. So he's got to pretend he's just lying. And
he's appealing to consumerism too with that. Like, we need to figure out, it's a showroom of different walls.
Totally. We're not sure if we're going to go with the stalactite pool or just like the bluestone.
Beautiful terracotta.
A terracotta. We're not sure. So we're going to see all 4. We'll see which one we like the best. So here he is. He's talking about the wall, and then he goes, keep playing.
And the wall is going to be built. It'll be funded a little bit later. Well, we want to get massive border security, and I think that both Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, I think they agree with it. But so we met last night with, as you know, Schumer, Pelosi, and a whole group, and I think we're fairly close, but we have to get massive border security. Oh, I think he's on board. Yeah, Mitch is on board. Paul Ryan's on board. We all feel, look, 92% of the people agree on DACA. But what we want is we want very, very powerful border security, okay?
I think 92% is just a made-up number that he pulled out of.
I feel like we would have known that.
I sort of feel like 92% is... That figure is the equivalent of the figure that at the end of the show, when I talk about where our members' revenue comes from, I just pull out a number that's like, it sounds like right, but I have no idea. I've never done the work. And I sort of feel like that's what he's doing for this major piece of legislation that he apparently has decided Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell are on board with, which maybe they are.
They are now.
They are now. Paul Ryan, I think yesterday, had said something to the effect of like, we should have a DACA. And so if all goes well, there'll be massive, huge border funding, whatever that means.
You could just call it the Big League Border Security Act and just send like a few National Guard troops down there.
Exactly. Actually, what's going to happen now is we're just going to spray paint all of their trucks gold. And hopefully this will end up with a DREAM Act, which will go even further than DACA and provide some more permanence. Now, this could fall apart by the time you're listening to this program. If you listen on podcast, it may have fallen apart in just the time that it took for us to play this video. But what it's going to do in the worst case scenario is rip apart the Republican Party in many respects. In the best case scenario, it's going to get a DREAM Act passed and rip apart the Republican Party. We obviously need to see the details because I don't like the idea of having to demonize other immigrants, undocumented or not, to help these dreamers. The reality is, though, from a pragmatic, practical standpoint, we have bad cards to play in this situation. And so hopefully this will work out well. We'll talk more about the conservative response in the fun half of the program. But first, have you inherited an old coin collection? Or maybe you're like me. You have an accumulation of coins and currency that you're not sure what to do with. I've got to find those books. I keep saying that over and over again. Littleton Coin is here to help. For over 70 years, Littleton Coin has been helping people just like you sell their coins and currency. And as an industry leader in collectible coins and currency, Littleton can pay you more. The best part, because it's really all about being able to trust the people you sell this stuff to. In 2016, the company's president, David Sunman, received the ANA, this is the American Numismatic Association Dealer of the Year Award. And Littleton Coin was honored by the Better Business Bureau Torch Award for marketplace ethics. So you know these people are people you can trust and rely on. Whether you're an experienced collector or someone who needs help identifying what you have in your collection, Littleton Coin Company is the place to sell your U.S. coins and currency. The process is incredibly simple. Visit littletoncoin.com/majority to learn more. Or give them a call toll-free, 877-857-7850. Tell them the Majority Report sent you. Also, just want to briefly mention, and we will get more to this, but Phillip Longman is someone we've wanted to have on for a while, because as you know, we've been talking about monopoly power for some time, and certainly starting before the last election. And he wrote a piece about healthcare monopolies in October of 2016, anticipating probably, I don't know, that Hillary Clinton would win the election. And in this piece, he compared and contrasted the two perspectives that Sanders and Clinton had on dealing with health care. But he reminds us in that piece that the real issue with health care, and single payer will help with this a little bit in some areas, but the real issue is the cost of health care in this country. And one of the big drivers of costs of health care in this country is monopolies. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Washington Monthly editor and former policy director and managing editor of New America's Open Markets program, Phillip Longman, will be here to tell us about that. You'll recall that the Open Markets program was just jettisoned from New America Foundation because of a controversy involving funding from Google. Maybe we'll touch on that with him briefly. I'm not sure how psyched he is to talk about it, but we'll see. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Is the sky the limit? What is the apogee? Is the sky the limit for me? I only mean to love you, for you to notice me. Now I dread how limited I
Leviathans and chimeras, hydras below the sea. They come between me and where I want to be. From this sky I've fallen to suffer and to burn. It is to the sky that I shall return.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Phillip Longman. He is a senior editor of Washington Monthly and the policy director and managing editor of the Open Market Institute, formerly with, or I should say the Open Markets program was formerly with a New America Foundation. Welcome to the program, Phillip.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Sam.
And, you know, we may circle back when we talk a little bit more about the general issues with monopoly, about what happened over at New America's Foundation in the relationship with the Open Markets program. We've talked about that quite a bit on this program, and I just want to maybe as we talk about healthcare, we'll circle back. But your piece, which was written in almost this time last year, actually, dealt with the competing proposals for, or opened with, I should say, the competing proposals for fixing our healthcare system by Clinton and Sanders. And so talk about that. I mean, yesterday, Bernie Sanders introduced a single-payer bill. Obviously, we are years away from that bill, maybe even getting a hearing in Congress. But nevertheless, explain to folks why that's not going to solve necessarily all of the cost issues that we have associated with healthcare.
Yeah. Well, I think the subject is more relevant today than it was a year ago, even, not least because so many people, not just Bernie Sanders, but so many people across the spectrum of the Democratic Party have decided that now is the time to salute what we're now calling single-payer healthcare, by which many people mean many different things. But it's important that we get clear about what exactly we mean and why, although there are many things that are great about what people describe as single-payer healthcare, it is not sufficient in itself to deal with the problems that we face in our healthcare system. So just to unpack that a little bit, Dana Milbank has a column out this morning in which the headline is, "The Democrats All Become Socialists." And he's referring to the great groundswell of people signing up for single-payer. But single-payer is not socialized medicine. It's nothing like socialized medicine. In fact, it's closer in its current form to corporate welfare. So here's what I mean, right? What is the Medicare program? What does it do, right? It does not provide health care to anybody. It doesn't have any hospitals, doesn't have any doctors that it employs, right? It provides subsidies to a healthcare provider industry that includes hospitals, includes drug makers, it includes device makers, it includes all kinds of folks, right? But it is not in the business of providing healthcare. We do actually have an example of real socialized medicine in the United States, and that would be your veterans healthcare system, right? Which does have actual hospitals, does employ doctors, and is run by public employees in the public interest. That's not what Medicare does. Medicare in effect, competes with private health insurance companies, but not with the private insurance, or not with private medical industrial complex, if you will. The problem is that years ago, like back in the 70s, when many folks started to make the crusade on the left for a single-payer healthcare system or a Medicare for all system, right? The healthcare industry in the United States was largely still a cottage industry. Most doctors worked in solo practices. Hospitals were mostly locally owned nonprofit organizations that were quite benign. Today, we're looking at a completely different world in which most communities in America today no longer have anything like real competition between hospitals or between doctors, because we've gone through this huge wave of mergers and acquisitions that has led to the agglomeration of what were once independent doctors and hospitals into giant hospital chains and integrated healthcare systems. And if we're not careful, all we're going to wind up doing is subsidizing that giant Goliath and making it even more politically powerful, and in a way that will prevent us from actually doing anything meaningful in the reform of healthcare delivery.
All right, before we get into
healthcare finance,
before we get into that danger, I want give us a sense. I mean, I think like intuitively, I think people see that doctors are becoming more associated with hospitals, and that, you know, certainly, you know, I live in New York. I've lived in New England with some pretty big cities and a lot of hospitals, and I felt conscious of the merging between hospitals. When we talk about like the 70s or the 60s or the 50s in terms of hospitals, were there that many more hospitals that were independent? Can you give us a sense of that as a data point? And let me also just say, when you started to raise Dana Milbank's piece, I was a little bit concerned, and it wasn't until I realized it was an example of what was wrong did I feel more comfortable. Where were you going with that? I just have to get that off my chest. But so just tell us about. I mean, in terms of the hospitals, like, is there a number? Like, were there 5,000, 10,000 hospitals, 500 hospitals? I mean, where have we gone to where have we come in terms of like ownership concentration on hospitals?
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's some stats. So basically, according to a study that came out of Harvard 2 years ago, we're now in a world in which 40% of all hospital stays occur in hospitals where there is no competition. It's the only hospital in town. Okay. So that is up dramatically from what it was in the 1950s. I can't tell you exactly what the number would have been, but it has been the preoccupation of the healthcare industry since really the 80s to merge, and it's actually been hastened along by the Affordable Care Act, which in many ways encourages healthcare providers into merging into things called accountable care organizations. We don't really have a coherent policy at the federal level on this question. You know, I like to say that on any given day, if you go over to one side of the mall in Washington, in Washington, right, you've got a building that houses the Department of Health and Human Services, which is every day trying to encourage healthcare providers to merge with each other so that they can integrate their care better and do less fragmented care under the vision of the Affordable Care Act. And on the other side of the mall, there's another federal bureaucracy called the Federal Trade Commission that is routinely suing hospitals for merging, and yet not doing enough of that merging or enough of that suing to prevent most markets in America now from having any effective competition. So these are local monopolies, right? There's not one giant healthcare chain that controls some giant part of the healthcare market, but healthcare itself is local. So when you live in a community where the last two hospitals merged with each other or were bought out by some larger chain, you no longer live in a world where you have choice, or even more to the point where your health insurance company has choice. Your health insurance company, when it comes into town to negotiate prices and to create a network, is basically a price taker because there's only one hospital. There's only one entity from which to buy healthcare. So that entity dictates the price.
Now, in the piece, you suggest that there is some value in vertical integration in creating those teams. And I think, I think there's some data to support that in terms of like medical outcomes. But explain the difference between vertical integration and horizontal integration. And I certainly, having just had a family member in for pneumonia with other complications, I could see what. And I don't know if this came from vertical integration, but there were different teams of doctors who were specialists, and they all seemed to be somewhat coordinated, but they were all under an umbrella, and that, I think, certainly I found comforting and more easy to navigate. But delineate for us the difference between vertical integration and horizontal integration, because we'll swing back to this when we talk about solutions on some level.
Well, here's part of the dilemma we face, right? That most people, as they experience the American healthcare system, experience something that's actually not a system. It's very, very fragmented. So we've all had the experience that you go to some doctor and you have to fill out all these forms while you're in the waiting room, even though you just filled out all those forms for some other doctor down the hall last week, but those two doctors don't coordinate with each other. They don't work off a common medical record, right? And so there's all this bouncing around, and it can be quite lethal, right? Because a lot of people don't have their care coordinated by any one doctor, one primary care medical home type doctor. Instead, they bounce around from multiple specialists who treat one body part at a time and don't talk to each other about what prescriptions, their drugs they're prescribing, and otherwise coordinate their care. And that's a big reason why American healthcare has become so dangerous. American healthcare is literally the third leading cause of death in the United States after all cancer and all heart disease because of the just extraordinary numbers of medical errors and uncoordinated care that goes on. So we really would like to have greater integration of care, right? But if the way we overcome this problem is by creating gigantic monopolies that are unaccountable to the public and are effectively unregulated in their pricing, we've maybe solved one problem partially, but created another one, a really big one. And that's, I'm arguing, is basically the main thrust of where we're going now. That's the main current in healthcare today, right? Is we are moving to these increasingly integrated giant systems, which have the promise of better integrating care and of achieving certain economies of scale, but which, if left unregulated, become predatory. And this, we face the same question in a lot of other realms, right? There's a lot of things, a lot of sectors of the economy where scale is important, right? We don't want to have 15 different electrical power companies covering every part of the city, right? It's more efficient to just have one. But having just one means you have to regulate it as a utility. If you just turn your back on the fact that it's a monopoly, you wind up being eaten. So that's where we are now. And studies that have come out in the last year or so suggest that in communities where the last two remaining hospitals merge, the price increase is about 20% on top of what exists in more competitive markets. And that's a lot because we don't really have any really competitive markets, right? It's if it's not a monopoly, it's a duopoly. And the amount of formal and informal collusion that it goes on between these institutions is just gigantic. So we have kind of a fork in the road. We either have to say we're going to use antitrust and other mechanisms like it to make sure that we don't have that we always have pretty robust competition in markets, or if we're going to go the other route and say we're going to embrace monopoly, then we need to regulate it. That means regulating prices, just like we would do with an electric utility or telephone utility.
So, isn't theoretically the part of the dilemma in terms of pricing anyways, that if you do have a duopoly or a monopoly in a local area where it's serviced by an insurer, a private insurer, that the private insurer comes in there and has no negotiation power because there's only basically there's only one provider essentially that they're negotiating with. But in the event that you have a single payer, doesn't the hospital then have a problem too, because there's only one buyer of their services, and that is, let's say, Medicare, expanded Medicare. So that returns. I mean, that's one of the theories behind why you would get some cost control out of Medicare, right? Is we're the only buyer. So you can raise your prices all you want, and you're right, you may be the only supplier, but I got news for you. Nobody's going to be able to come in and buy your services because we're the buyer. How much of that will help, and why is that not enough?
Okay. Well, again, let's go back to the 70s when people first started thinking about this, right? And they pointed to places like Canada, and they said, well, in Canada, they have a single-payer system. Actually, they didn't have a single-payer system. They had 12 different provinces that purchased health care. But, right, it was government-purchased health care versus a highly fragmented, deconcentrated healthcare industry, mostly composed of solo practice doctors. So in that case, the government did have a great deal of market power over these providers and did exercise great power in restraining their prices. The doctors responded in Canada by forming a union. In other words, a kind of monopoly of their own, right? But nonetheless, right, it was basically a very powerful government player coming into the market versus a very fragmented healthcare system, right? Today, what we're looking at in most markets under a Medicare for all type treatment, if that's all it is single payer meets single provider. And what happens then? I mean, let's make this like really concrete, right? Let's imagine we're in Cleveland, and in Cleveland there's a single institution called the Cleveland Clinic, and it has 80% market share and growing, right, in that market. Medicare needs to make sure that people that live in Cleveland can use their Medicare insurance. So it has to come to some kind of accommodation with the Cleveland Clinic, because if people in Cleveland can't use their Medicare to go to the Cleveland Clinic, they don't have any place else to go. So what's the politics of that going to look like, right? We're going to have the Cleveland Clinic out there running commercials and having their lobbyists spread the message that these evil people in Washington are standing in the way of you being able to come and get the very fine services of the Cleveland Clinic. And you should write your congressman, you should get mad and throw the rascals out because they're not giving the Cleveland Clinic what the Cleveland Clinic wants. And that's how it would play out. It already plays out that way, but not at the scale that we would be talking about in the future. So, again, it's single provider.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
However, right, I mean, you're talking about the congressperson from Cleveland, and you're talking about perhaps some pressure on those senators. I mean, but that's the point of why you get that value of it being a national buyer. And so, I mean, I would think that on some level would mitigate it. But I mean, I get your drift here on some level is that a single payer will increase the market power, but as long as you have a single provider or increasingly concentrated provider, their political power grows.
Yeah. And the Cleveland Clinic has a great brand, right? People think that the Cleveland Clinic provides really great health care. They have a really aggressive public relations effort that is highly effective. Most people have heard of the Cleveland Clinic, just have the received idea that that's a really top-notch organization. So they're going to be really upset to hear that their government is not allowing them to go to the Cleveland Clinic. That's the basic dynamic, right? Another way to think of this is where else do we find this in the federal government, right? We find this in defense contracting, right? We have a single-payer defense department, right? All of the weapon systems purchased in the United States are purchased by a single, military-grade weapon systems are purchased by a single buyer, right? Single payer called the Department of Defense. But it turns out that there's been more and more merging of defense contractors to the point that if you want to build an aircraft carrier, say, there's only one shipyard left in the United States that will build one for you. So when you go to build an aircraft carrier, you have to go to that shipyard and they tell you how much it costs. Basically the same dynamic.
So, okay. So with that reality, I am announcing my candidacy for 2020. I win because I just catch fire. What tools already exist, and how should I use them in regards to this problem? And what tools would I look to Congress to pass?
I think we need, and we have all the. In current law, we have all of those policy levers we need. You don't really need a whole lot of new legislation, if any. But you want to use existing antitrust law to ensure that in every market, every major metropolitan area, right, there's at least 2, maybe 3 independent, competing integrated healthcare systems, right? We kind of did that with car makers back in the 50s, right? We understood that there was a certain economies of scale to making cars. It didn't make sense to have 70 different car makers in the United States, but it didn't make sense to have one either. So federal competition policy kind of engineered things that throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there would be 3 to 4 major automakers, which was kind of the sweet spot. It left you with economies of scale, possibilities for integration, but didn't leave any of them in a monopoly position. So do the same kind of thing with hospitals.
But how does that work from a local standpoint? Like okay, so, I mean, that's one thing to say, like, we've got national car companies, but how do you make sure you go into Cleveland, and what do you say? That, you do this by saying, like, okay, if you are a hospital corporation that owns more than, let's say, 39% or 25% of the services in any one locality, you have to sell this off? Is that basically it?
Yeah. And I mean, and throughout American history, we've done things. We used to do things like that with chain stores, right? You said, you can't. We used to say the old Atlantic and Pacific grocery store, right? You can't control more than 40% of the groceries in any county in America, right? That was to ensure competition.
We theoretically do that with owner-operated television stations, although Sinclair Media has just found a little bit of a loophole. Yeah. They've been giving a gift. But it's the same concept. And so theoretically, what would happen? So we say this, I announced this. We have the statutory authority to do it through the Federal Trade Commission, I guess. And I say, okay, you get 4 years to work this out, 3 years. I don't know how long it will take. And then hospital corporations will end up with like 3 or 4 major hospital corporations, or maybe 3 or 4 regional, per region, I guess, that might be big hospitals that will operate 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 different facilities, and these companies will split it up there. Is that like what? Like when this is fixed, what do you envision?
All healthcare delivery, at least, is local. So it might turn out that you had big national chains, but in any given market, they wouldn't have more than 20% market share, right? You would just prevent that. And by the way, the reason to do this is not just to encourage price competition among providers, although there'd be some of that. I mean, that's an important consideration. Right, but it's also to restrain the political power of any one of these providers, right? And this is an ancient trade-off that in American politics that current generations forgotten about. But in the last progressive era, people had furious debates about the difference between busting up trusts and monopolies versus letting big trusts and monopolies operate but regulating them. Right. And so you had people like Teddy Roosevelt towards the end of his career would say, well, actually, monopolies can be good, right? Because monopolies have all these economies of scale and they can deliver cheaper prices many times. So let's embrace monopolies, but have this really big government regulatory system to make sure that they behave themselves. And then you had other people like Woodrow Wilson and Louis Brandeis. They're saying, nothing could be more naive than that thought. The idea that once you allow these giants to achieve huge scale, that they won't take over the government too, right? And I think, and I think most progressives, if they examine the way they look at the world, will recognize the essential truth of the proposition that over time, giant corporations come to monopolize not just markets, but politics itself. And so we need to make sure that we have locally owned, locally controlled, small scale providers of healthcare. Right.
So what is the mechanism for that? So I mean, I can say in any locality, you cannot control more than, let's just say, 25% of the medical services. That's still a recipe for, like a clear channel of medicine, essentially, right? Where they have a local affiliates in every place in the country. And then you've got a very powerful political entity. They may own only 25% of the country's medical, but it would be the country's as opposed to, 80% in Cleveland, let's say. So can you then say like, and you can only own 25% in any given locality, and in terms of nationally, you can't control more than, let's say, 10%.
Right. Well, there's trade-offs in that question. I don't pretend to know the definitive one answer to that, right? You might decide that by limiting the market power of the provider in any given location, that would be enough to get the kind of economic and political competition that we need. Or you might decide, it's really convenient to have healthcare providers that have a national scale so that when I move from Washington to Phoenix, I can stay with the same integrated healthcare system, that there's There's that makes for better medicine. It's a better consumer experience. So it's trade-offs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm much less afraid of one company having a national presence, but remaining competitive in every given market, versus individual markets that just get monopolized, right?
Because, and that is okay. And so that is the balancing act. There is you're going to deal with the amassing of political power, but because they won't have pricing power in the same way on a local basis, that's going to inhibit their political power as well on some level.
Yeah. So local consumers of healthcare and local politicians will have the power to say no, right? Because they won't, if we can't come to an accommodation with Cleveland Clinic on what the right price is under their Medicare contract, well, we can send people over to this other hospital system, right? And people will be happy to go because that one's up and ready and eager to please, right? So that's the basic vision. We have to remember here too that we're talking about. You asked earlier about vertical integration, right? Vertical integration refers to people monopolizing all different elements of a supply chain, right? So in healthcare, what that means is you've got a single entity that owns the doctors, right? Literally employs the doctors, a single entity that literally controls all the labs in town, right? And literally controls the hospital too. And now increasingly, literally controls insurance. So if you live in Pittsburgh, for example, we have this entity that's called the Pittsburgh Academic Medical Center that sounds benign, but actually has a monopolization, not just in the provision of all forms of healthcare, including testing, but in the financing of healthcare too. So that's what we're up against. And of course, there's all kinds of monopolization in other forms of healthcare, right? Like insurance companies themselves insurance companies themselves are merging, but also, and more to the point, drug companies are merging, and that gives them more pricing power and would give them more pricing power under some single payer system, right?
All of which, I guess, is, and so none of what we've talked about cannot be done with laws already on the books. Is that right?
No, I think all of it can be done. We have a robust tradition in the United States of antitrust, and we have all kinds of laws on the books dating back to the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 and the Clayton Act of 1914 and all kinds of other legislation on the books that gives federal regulators the power to do these kind of things. They did these kind of things for most of the 20th century, an era in which the United States emerges in industrial policy and built a gigantic, broad, prosperous middle class, right? And then we stopped doing them sometime in the late 70s, 80s. And that's basically it. It's a matter of prosecutorial discretion, mostly. We've got some case law now that's built up that some people argue makes it more difficult to do it. We might have to pass some laws here and there, but the basic difference is, what are the criteria you use to decide what's a monopoly, right? Under current practice, right, prosecutors basically won't bring a case unless they can show overt collusion, right, between two entities and or price gouging. So if there's, in the absence of price gouging, in the absence of collusion, any monopoly is basically left alone. That's why we have something like Amazon, right?
Right.
But it doesn't have to be that way. That's prosecutorial discretion, right?
And we should say that, and we've certainly spoken to both folks like Kay Sabeel Rahman and Barry Lynn and Matt Stoller over the past year or so. This is largely a function of a Reagan era, Robert Bork led revision of how we look at monopolies as being problematic, and deeming that monopolies are only problematic based upon what kind of price they can deliver on a product, with ignoring all of the other societal implications, like their political power, like long-term, pricing. You know, at one point, and when Amazon owns everything, they're going to say, hey, guess what?
That's right.
Free shipping? Not so much. And, you know, the cheaper stuff, not so much anymore. And what are you going to do? You know, there's not going to be anybody left. All right. Well, with all that said, another example of that is the massive power. They say Amazon gets something like 80 cents of every dollar online. The only other behemoth that can rival Amazon in its control of a certain sector of what happens online is, of course, Google. And just briefly from your perspective, because there's a lot of controversy, and I understand, you know, within the context of think tanks, there's all sorts of different dynamics that are in play, including personalities and whatnot. But the bottom line is, Open Markets, the program that is now spun off, you're now a policy director and managing editor of an Open Market Institute, as opposed to an Open Markets program at a New America think tank. Well, how does what happened there shine some light on this dynamic of the power of monopolies, even though it had nothing to do with the pricing of, you know, searching online, let's say?
Well, New America was a think tank, is a think tank. I've been there since 1999 when it started. And as a think tank, it needs to raise money. And over time, it felt the need to raise money from corporate sponsors and from various very high net worth individuals, including, as it turned out, Eric Schmidt, who was the chairman of Google, who became the chairman of New America for many, many years, and who gave vast amounts of money to New America. Now, there are many things I like about Eric Schmidt. I've spent a fair amount of time with Eric Schmidt. He you know, I will attest to his character, right? But, right, when you have an institution that is that beholden to an entity like Google that's getting more and more powerful in the world, it becomes very difficult to speak freely about Google's role in the monopolization of the American economy. So basically that was a train wreck that was kind of predictable, and it happened. And so we are no longer with New America. But we have other sources of funding that are not so directly involving conflicts of interest, and so the work continues. But it's a big problem. It gets to, I guess, your larger question here. It gets to this point about why do we do antitrust? Since the 70s, the idea is we only do it to enhance consumer welfare, as if all any of us are is consumers, and as if our welfare is completely defined by cheap prices. Well, guess what? We're not just all consumers. We're citizens too, right? And we're also producers, right? Sellers of labor, sellers of things, right? And so antitrust shouldn't have this focus merely on consumers. It should have a focus on citizens and on the overall political and economic health of society, right? And what we're seeing now in the collision between Google and New America illustrates it. What we're seeing now is that this amass of economic power eventually seeps in to all segments of society and corrupts them subtly, right? It's corrupting the world of Washington Policy Institute's think tanks, because no think tank left in D.C. that isn't beholden in some way to these giant entities, right? It increasingly has monopolized academia, right, where Google is sponsoring research all over the place at a time when other entities are becoming relatively smaller. The federal government is retreating from its support of research. So academic institutions increasingly bend their research to fit the Google line. And Google doesn't necessarily have to tell scholars that they have to come to a certain conclusion, but over time, there's just a built-in bias that's going to make certain subjects not talked about and others talked about. And so that's part of the reason why antitrust is about the health of society as a whole, not just of the economy.
Phillip Longman, Policy Director, Managing Editor of the Open Market Institute. Where can people get more information if they want to get more information on Open Market Institute?
Well, I would tell you to Google Open Market Institute, but I'm not sure what will happen.
I just tried, and it took me to the Competitive Enterprise Institute.
You're kidding, really?
Yeah.
Well, we have to work on that. We're working really hard. We've only been up and running for a couple of days, right? But
I'll tell you what. You email me, not through Gmail, and tell us, and we will announce it on this program. Phillip Longman, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will really have some fun today. And I mean it. We've got folks who are Steve King, who's so upset about the fact that maybe his wall is not going to be built.
We're going to revel in conservative tears.
There's going to be a lot of cleansing ourselves with the tears of conservatives this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Also, going to hear from Cory Booker, put on the hot spot about his big pharma interests and how he can reconcile that with Medicare for All support. And then remember that Alex Jones acolyte who got owned by
dunked on, they're saying.
Dunked on?
That's the new owned.
Got dunked on by that 12-year-old girl. And you know what? Make sure you have the original too, because they are little shifty in the way that they replay that. You know what I mean? So they can justify this
some
thing.
music under it.
And then the heartwarming story of a rags to riches story involving a Scottish actress, I think she's Scottish, who got into some trouble with her Instagram post. And then that led to some trouble for both her and her husband. And now I think Steve Mnuchin, among other things, is in the doghouse. Because, guys, look, you can't try and pass off the cubic zirconia as an engagement ring. And I love the thing like, oh, sweetheart, I'm going to take you on a great honeymoon. I'm going to see if I can get the government to pay for it. All that and more, ladies and gentlemen, on the fun half today. And don't forget, you can support this program by becoming a member. Best part about being a member, we give you bonus material. No, wait a sec. Let me back up. The best part about being a member, you are supporting the free show. That's the best part about it. And then the second best part about it is you get more content. All sorts of different things you can listen to at any given time. It gives you a world of choice. The third best thing about it is you don't have to hear the commercials. So when members hear my voice right now, they're going like, commercials? What commercials? I've never heard a commercial. You have commercials? Yeah, occasionally we have commercials. You don't have to listen to those. So it's a great deal. Go to jointhemajorityreport.com and become a member today. It is literally pennies a day. I mean, a lot of pennies, A lot of more pennies than you would carry around, but
it's technically pennies a day to take a government jet to your honeymoon.
It's true. That's true. But that would be more pennies than you could even have in your house. This is more like the type of pennies where you'd be like, I got to empty these out at the end of the day. I can't keep walking around with this many pennies. But when you talk about quarters, it's more quarters. It's less quarters than you could carry in your pocket. You wouldn't even feel a thing if you carried those in quarters. So join themajorityreport.com. And, of course, if you buy your stuff through Amazon, many of you do, the least you can do is to give us a kickback at majorityreportkickback.com. But, and granted, it's Walmart, but online, it'd be nice to have a duopoly as opposed to a monopoly. Jet.com. We also have a link for jet.com at majorityreportkickback.com. And it's a great service. I like Jet quite a bit, actually. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Fair trade. Coffee. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. See you in the fun half.
All the time, she said no, 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 no. Like to speak my mind. She said no, 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 no. And I know her time's not free. She didn't waste none on me. Situation sad. She said no, 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 no. Things are looking bad. She said no, 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 no. And if it was up to me, I'd tell her a thing or three. Every time I see her look my way, I don't know, girl, what to say. Situation sad. She said no, 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 no. Things are looking bad. She said no, 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 no. And if it was up to me, I'd tell her a thing or three. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no.
Yes, it's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. The fun half on the Majority Report. Welcome, members. Thank you for being here. You're calling from an 847 area code. What is your name? Where are you calling from?
It's Josh from Chicago. Although I'm
Hello,
not calling
Josh.
from Chicago.
What's that?
I'm not calling from Chicago.
Josh, I appreciate the level of honesty that you always bring to this program when you call. And
I'm guilty.
No, don't. There's nothing wrong with not calling from Chicago. But I appreciate your letting us know that you are from Chicago, but in fact are calling from some other place.
It's not
some
like
other
impersonating
secret
a
place.
police officer.
That's right. There's nothing. We'll let you off with just a with just a ticket, with just a warning this time. What's on your mind?
Good. two things. First of all, the voter turnout yesterday or 2 days ago in New York was like really abysmal.
Pathetic.
I don't know if you've seen this. It's 14%,
Yeah.
and so I think for people complaining about policies or whatever, if you want to see this change, you have to go out and vote in these local elections, because there were actually some very important races, like the DA race, that went to somebody who doesn't care about ending broken windows. So it really sucks. But I also want to talk about my favorite subject, Medicare for All, and how happy I am that I think I read like 35% of the Democratic senators are on board with this bill.
It is 35% of the Democratic caucusing senators. So you can include Bernie Sanders in that. It was, it is 17.
Wait, hold on. He's not a real Democrat.
That's what I'm saying. But he caucuses with Democrats. And so it's 17 of 48. Which equals 35%. There was a couple more than I thought yesterday. And just Steve Kornacki actually tweeted out at one point that in 1993, there was only 4 of 56 Democratic senators who would co-sponsor a single-payer bill. So progress, some of it may very well be just lip service. I mean, the thing that, well, Josh, go ahead. You have your say, and then I'll have mine.
Well, like how many were considering or for single payer during the Obama, like, because there was a single payer part of the Obamacare bill, right? Or something, or maybe I'm thinking of the public option, but
you're thinking of the public option.
I remember Franken saying that there were only 10 senators on board or something like that, in a much bigger Democratic Senate caucus.
Right. I would say that folks like Cory Booker, well, I don't know if Cory Booker was even in the Senate at that time. I don't think he was. But Kamala Harris, obviously, or Camilla, people, I don't care. Listen, I'm never going to pronounce her name correctly, so don't even, just forget it, folks. Stop sending me emails. Ms. Harris from California, Booker, there's a couple others who are new senators, but yeah, I believe this. I mean, look, the thing is that it's not a question of what is in people's hearts. It's a question of what they think is politically expedient for them, or politically safe, or politically opportunistic for them to come out in support of. And that's the way politicians work. I mean, maybe there's a couple of exceptions, but who cares? They are literally the exceptions that prove the rule. And so this is more of an indication of what era we are living in. And the beauty of this bill, and I think it was it Harold Meyerson who wrote a piece? I think Harold Meyerson wrote a great piece, and I think it was in the American Prospect, I'm not sure. But it was The Genius of Bernie's Gradualism. The bill calls...
Yes, I read that.
Yes, the bill calls for, and this is what I like about this the most as well. It calls for a 4-year phase-in, right, where you start with dropping the age, off the top of my head, I think it was to 50 for Medicare and anybody under the age of 18. And then you slowly layer in other ages. And the thing is that I think, to the extent that I have seen some poo-pooing of this, the numbers aren't there yet. It's not specific enough. It's going to be too difficult for the American people. All of this. The thing that I think is great about the way this bill was structured is that, and you see this just in terms of, like, Bernie Sanders is co-sponsoring Brian Schatz's bill, right, which is far less ambitious. And Brian Schatz, incidentally, also another member of the Senate who was not there,
is co-sponsoring.
Is co-sponsoring Bernie's bill. So this bill, and because Bernie is doing that with Schatz, both allows for incrementalism and allows for phase-in. You could get a separate bill that just says we're going to drop the age of Medicare to 50. And you could get a separate bill that just says we're going to just say everybody under the age 18 gets a Medicare card. And you could actually continually build upon this, but you still have this horizon that Bernie Sanders has set, right? Like anything that is done now that is a partial achievement of this set of goals is seen in that light, as opposed to the ends. I mean, that was the thing. That was the problem, is that, like, it is to even if it's just a something to aim for, you have now set the marker. And every time a piece of legislation, even if it's an incremental piece of legislation,
it's building to that.
It's building to that, as opposed to an ends, which the Affordable Care Act was seen as, right? Was just like, we're done now. We're done. We fixed it. Well, wait a second. No, it's not fixed, and we have no ideas on how to fix it from here. That was the problem with the Affordable Care Act, is that you could do some small tweaks, but it wasn't like, this allows you to actually build a part of the house that you could actually live in, that actually makes the house more comfortable, and you keep building and building and building, and you get a McMansion. Maybe that's not the best example, but you get where I'm going on that.
Yeah, and I think, the thing I do, because you do need the 4-year phase, and I think especially because there are going to be some people who are going to
Definitely. You definitely need.
It's going to be a difference between going to your normal, like right now, and then doing, when you have your Medicare for All system. The thing I also
you may need a 6-year phase in, but the point is if you're doing a phase in, it means this is where we're headed, and that's the point.
That's where we're headed. Yes, and and also just the fact that you have different people working on this bill who are going to bring different things to the bill, and so they can fix in the details that sometimes, admittedly, Bernie does leave out. So, I mean, I think, and the bill is it's a really good bill. And again, 35% of Democratic senators are on board with that. That means nearly a majority of the Democratic Senate caucus is on board with that. And it's going to pressure other Democratic senators, even in tight races in 2018, to get on board with this, because they see this as the direction the party's headed.
Right. Or at the very least, I mean, it just, they're going to have to do something. Small fixes to the Affordable Care Act is just it's simply going to it's going to be meaningless in the context of Democratic politics. Appreciate the call.
Yep.
Even though you're not calling from Chicago. Greg, to the IMer the other day, who asked, what do I think of Augusto Pinochet's revolution against Allende? Since you asked, what do I think? I think during the Cold War, the KGB and CIA trained terrorists and organized coups. Reagan funded the Contras, CIA helped Pinochet, and trained Noriega and overthrew Mossadegh in Iran. The KGB funded and trained Fidel Castro, Ho Chi Minh, as well. KGB funded and trained Castro? Is that right?
I think there was a bit more independence than that would suggest.
I think so, yeah. Ho Chi Minh, as well as the PLO against Western-backed Israel and Jordan after Stalin died. Yes, Michael, I do follow history after all. I'm sorry, you just all missing my Scaramouche references. Epish, I told you a couple months ago these guys at Open Markets thought unions monopolized labor. By the way, you really think you don't have a working class audience? I guess you would all know better than me. No, I don't know. I don't know who our audience is. I think we do. I mean, I think we probably have a broad mix, to be honest with you. Got tweeted by a carpenter the other day. I know we have, I think we have a broad mix. Joer. Hey, Sam, I am as working class as it gets. There you go. Every day I play the Majority Report podcast over the speakers in the milling department of my machine shop.
Awesome.
There's 15 people in the department, 10 of which are left of center. What's with the other 5? What are you people doing? What's wrong with you? Seriously. Come over here. Everybody gather around the thing that this is playing over, the speakers, in this milling department of the machine shop. Hold on. Turn off one of those machines that's making all the noise. I don't know what machines are in there. They're just what are they What do they make?
This would be a fun tour to tour people's workplaces, actually.
That would be
Majority
great.
Report
People
tour.
should send in photos.
Yeah.
Send us a photo of your workplace at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Because the new blog is going to launch soon. It's going to be sweet. And we're just going to figure out how to do it. Maybe we'll just do like some type of, I don't know, maybe like a gallery or something. Secret identity politics. Great guest, even though it sounds like Mr. Longman is hung up on the politics of framing and regulating healthcare as a utility. I don't think it's necessary to overthink the policy because the Cleveland Clinic wants to protect its brand. Someone has to have a monopoly of force, and in the end, that's presumably a partnership of the people of Cleveland who don't want to die and the single-payer health care provider they've hypothetically voted for. If anything, the politics should be about the limits of competition in our economy and how multiple providers don't keep costs down. The one thing I don't need more of health care is choice. Still good things to think about the arguments for the future. Militant apathy. Couple of points on the Michael Bennett incident. First, the fact that everybody's body cam off is complete bullshit. Anybody with a reasonable intellect would know that. Second, the idea that the union would call for Bennett to be investigated by the NFL is just petty and vindictive. Trust me, if they had an ounce of PC, they would have charged him with false statements, gotten a warrant, and literally snatched him right off the field and extradited him to Las Vegas, which indicates to me that the police department doesn't have any PC as probable cause in this instance, folks. And the officer messed up. Lastly, I have found that a lot of union spokesmen and some union reps are ass clowns by nature. In my opinion, this is because many of them were F-ups on the street, or they feel their careers got crushed by their department and they have an emotional axe to grind. Look at Cleveland, NYC, St. Louis. All those union spokesmen are nasty, big-mouth clowns who seem to make the situations worse in most cases. If they were ever sworn in as officers, I would love to see what's in their IA files. I want to see what's in Sheriff David Clark's as well. People recall Militant Apathy, a former police officer. Plants on fire. Hey, I'm our crew. Richmond, Virginia statute update. After some wavering, the rally in Richmond to preserve the Confederate statues appears to be going forward on Saturday. The event is now being organized by CSA2, the New Confederate States of America, a neo-Confederate organization from Tennessee. This group is actively advising its members to bring weapons. Wonderful. Authorities are planning to cordon off a weapons-free assembly zone in which clubs, sticks, and shields will be banned. Amazingly, city officials have not addressed whether this ban would also extend to guns. VA is open carry. In spite of this, Kim Gray, the ostensibly liberal councilwoman for this district, said she is most concerned about violent left-wing protesters who identify as Antifa. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about this. Nomi Konst of TYT Politics was, I don't know where she was, maybe in the Senate, I guess so, with Cory Booker. Cory Booker gets a lot of funding from the pharmaceutical industry. He voted against a measure, I think, that would have allowed pharmaceuticals from being brought in from Canada. It, of course, was not legislation. It wouldn't have become law, but it was a marker. So Nomi Konst wanted to know how he reconciles his desire for a single payer with his past support for the pharmaceutical industry.
How are you going to balance the pharmaceutical industry in your state with the provisions for Medicare for all?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of givens right now. And the biggest given is just any objective person could think to themselves, why is the exact same drug so much more expensive in this country than a few hundred miles north in Canada? And a lot of that has to do is that we don't have the power to negotiate down costs. It has to do with all the middle men and women that are profiteering off of this broken system we have. One of the biggest culprits was mentioned today, the PBMs. So having a system like this that can use the collective bargaining power that comes from having Medicare for all, as well as beginning to expose a lot of the other ways that these prices are driven up, is going to help us drive it down. And by the way, this has to be just one component of a larger effort to drive down the costs of healthcare. All the areas in which there's profiteering going on. Why, when you look at your healthcare bills, you see aspirin sometimes costing, $4 a pill or something outrageous like that. So we have a lot of work to do to drive down healthcare costs. This is a very important step in the right direction.
Have they voiced opposition to the bill?
Pause it. So there she says, have they voiced opposition to the bill, speaking of the pharmaceutical industry?
I'm looking for the right answers. I'm not looking for who's voicing opposition. I'm willing to listen to anybody, but the reality is, and again, people need to know how I got to the United States Senate. I was elected in the Central Ward of Newark in 1998 as a city council person representing one of the poorest census tracts in the United States of America. And I still am the only senator that lives in a neighborhood that's low income, below $14,000 is the, I walk as a median income. I walk outside my neighbors, I talk with them. They are getting screwed by a system that is a poverty trap, that is holding people back from succeeding in America. And so that's where my loyalty lies always, is how can we make America work for everybody, not just the favored few, but...
Well, there it is. I mean, he's not backing off that bill. And if you want more on the PBMs you referred to, that's the Pharmacy Benefit Management. I think David Dayan and I spoke about it some time back. You can just Google. But there's Cory Booker tweeting, critics question whether we can afford Medicare for all. The real question is, how much longer can Americans afford not to? I mean, look, Cory Booker clearly thinking about 2020, thinking about running, realizes that he's going to have to do this. He is trying to get progressives to like him. And he should get some kudos for this position. It certainly helps. I have still some major issues with his relationship with hedge funders and his perspective on education. But I don't care what's in his heart. I don't care if he cares about me or who he secretly is inside himself. I just want him to implement and feel like it's in his best political interest to implement policies that I like. So good to see him able to answer that question, and good for Nomi Khan asking him it. Meanwhile, let's go back to talk just briefly. As far as I can tell, there's still a deal on DACA from the President of the United States. Now, that may have changed. We have been on air for at least an hour, so God knows what it is, what it could be. But here is Allison Camerata she's talking directly just to Steve King is the only person there. Yep. And Steve King, of course, the congressman from Iowa, who is rabidly racist. Yeah. You remember one of his greatest hits was that they have cantaloupe calves from walking across the desert. I don't know if you ever heard that one. Yeah. I'm sure you could do a coffee table book on Steve King's racism. But here he is by phone on CNN's New Day with Allison Camerata, responding to the news that Donald Trump has announced that he's made a deal to push for a DREAM Act with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
Congressman Steve King of Iowa, and we want to get to him right now. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Allison.
What did you just hear the president say?
Well, you have to interpret what you hear him say, and wanting a big or a large or a massive border security deal, that doesn't address domestic enforcement. It doesn't really even tell us what the border security might be. And if we don't build a wall all the way through, then the rest of it is subject to prosecutorial discretion, his, as was under Barack Obama's, or the next president. So I think something's going to have to be reversed here with this president's policy, or it'll just blow up his base. I mean, this was a straight-up promise all the way through his campaign. And I might add that I've told the president that I market-tested his immigration policy for 14 years. And we spent a lot of time in Iowa having those debates and discussions, and then across New Hampshire, South Carolina, and beyond. I don't think it's unclear to anybody what those campaign promises were, but it looks to me like he's preparing to keep Hillary Clinton's campaign promise rather than his own.
Here's what...
There you go. The conservative tears falling like rain across the country. Here's Sean Hannity's tweet. Well, let's go. Actually, let's do Breitbart's tweet first. They're all so sad that their sadistic racism would have the chance to bloom. There it is. Breitbart's front page. Amnesty Dawn. Report. Trump caves on DACA. With a picture of a illustration of people of various non-white colors with the sign that says, "We are here to stay." The horror. And then to see this from Sean Hannity, one of the president's greatest supporters. If reports true, 100%. I don't know what that means, but I think what he meant to say, if reports are 100% true, or I don't know. Maybe that's like his keeping it 100. Or if reports true 100%, period, I blame ours, as in the letter R, as in Republicans. They caused this. They wanted him to fail and now pushed him into the arms of political suicide. If true. Yeah, it's hard. They just pushed him into the arms of, God, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. No! I just had to do that because the music was rising. So there it is. I mean, again, this is, hopefully we'll get some legitimate DREAM Act out of this. But it certainly is fun to watch it create some dissension amongst the Republicans. Let's go to the phones. You're calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, this is Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. Glad to hear from you. What is your response to the deal? Ronald Reagan being an immigration lawyer and host of an immigration law podcast.
Yeah, we don't talk about that.
What's the name of it again?
It doesn't matter.
Come on. You don't know the name of your own podcast? Okay.
It's called Redirect.
Redirect,
yeah,
yes.
It's not important. Yeah,
show.
so I mean, who knows? This president's so weird. I think earlier today he denied that there was a deal. And I guess I called in a couple weeks ago and encouraged people to make sure that they're calling their Congress people and really pushing the outer limits of whatever agreement there could be. Because, I mean, any type of immigration reform is going to end up leaving people out, unfortunately, and I think that there's still room to push for example, pathway to citizenship. That's one thing that's potentially up for grabs, and then just trying to get as many people
Wasn't that in the 2007 DREAM Act?
Yeah, it's been in past versions of the DREAM Act. I think that it's always included a path to citizenship, but this thing could get whittled down to basically a legislative form of DACA, where a limited group of people get a work permit that they have to keep renewing, and so that's important. Two quick things on immigration, actually. The first one, Steve King yesterday, one of his big things, Steve King, if you remember, also was the one who told Chris Hayes during the election that he said something super racist about Western civilization being the only source of
and I feel
everything
like
that's
Hayes was just sort of so floored, didn't really catch it.
He apologized he apologized afterwards because he sort of let it hang there. But it was sort of so overt that I think it took him off guard. But so one of his alleged concerns is that the Dreamers will turn into essentially anchor babies, quote unquote, and that they'll be able to transmit benefits later to their parents, thus rewarding the person or the people who committed the so-called crime of coming to the country illegally. But people should know that the laws in place already are very effective in prohibiting the so-called anchor baby phenomenon. So if you come here illegally and you have a child and the child turns 21 years old, it's really, really hard for that child to then transmit any type of immigration benefits to the parents, because the parents are barred from getting permanent residency because of their unlawful presence and stuff. It gets a little weird, but basically that's already not a thing. Anchor babies are not a thing. And then the other thing is Paul Ryan today tweeted out about MS-13, and so that's maybe the tack he's going to take. That
we just got to keep the MS-13s out.
Right. And, gangs are a real issue, and our communities do have gangs, and that's certainly a security concern. But I spend a lot of time at the local ICE office, and every time I go into the waiting room, it's full of, honestly, like mothers there with their small children, and they're doing these sort of routine check-ins where they're just having the officer sign a piece of paper. And the amount of time and resources being spent on people that just absolutely pose no risk to anybody is astounding.
Well,
it's really, really incredible. And so,
and to add to that, when you let us know about a policy shift that happened several months ago, where the act of entering into the country without documentation, even the first time, became equivalent in terms of ICE's agenda as to who to pursue as an MS-13 member or a gang member or someone who had committed a violent offense in this country, which goes against the entire, so they're fear-mongering, but they're specifically setting up policies where they are basically saying, oh, we're going to divert resources away from those people.
Right, and it's right, and what I'm saying is it's not just theoretical. In practice, this is what's happening. When you go down to these offices, you find officers who are, not to disparage the entire agency, but sitting around and, I had a check-in last week with a client who's been here since the 80s, but she's got an old removal order because she got screwed over by some fake attorney in 1995. And she's been checking in since 2010. And so we checked in, she's never committed a crime. She's got 3 U.S. citizen kids.
But wait, you're saying she's only been here for 30 some odd years.
Right. They told us to come back in 2 weeks. So we're going to go back and they're going to sign the paper again. And so my message, if there's anybody out there who wants to call the representative or argue on Facebook, if your concern really is about security and MS-13, which is a legitimate concern in some ways, not in the way that they portray it, but the very, very, very first thing you should do is pass a very broad amnesty and allow the people who are here undocumented to come out of the shadows and get out of the way so that ICE could do their job. They don't do that because it's about race and other things, but that's the perfect way to respond to somebody like Paul Ryan, who's trying to say that, the only way to deal with this issue is to enforce the law on the books. And what I'm saying is the laws on the books are extremely ill-equipped to deal with the problem that they're saying that we have. So
yes, I mean the only problem with that, with what you're saying, is that they are totally disingenuous. But
right, exactly.
But it is a good rebuttal. Ronald Reagan.
I wanted to say one more thing. It seems ironic to me that Kelly was so against the cuck jokes, and then she turned around and cucked you guys like super hard by going to TYT.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you do find
ultimate
that
cucking.
That's completely cucking.
She was playing the long game.
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly.
RedirectPodcast.com. Redirect
All right.
podcast. You're out. What do you mean? All right.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
That was a John from San Antonio. All right. All right.
We got to get that. Colin from a redirectpodcast.com. Colin from a 478 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Jeff in Georgia. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great, Sam. At this week's meeting of the League of Extraordinarily Progressive Southern Gentlemen, our ongoing lecture series, Communism, How to Centrally Plan Liberty, will continue. So y'all come on out now and have a good time with us, okay?
Indeed, will do. Dissident peasant. Did I say peasant?
Yeah, it's the dissident peasant, Jeff in Georgia. Hey, man, I just wanted to say real quick, based on a preponderance of the evidence, there is literally zero doubt in my mind that in his heart, Trump is absolutely a racist, right, and a white supremacist. And he's got weird ideas about eugenics and race supremacy and all that. And yet, he's responding to pressure from the left, right, not to throw DACA away. And the right is coming back at him with more pressure, calling him, Amnesty Dawn or whatever they're saying over there, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just another example coming at it from another way as to why it really, really very rarely matters what's in the politician's heart.
Yep.
Because I literally have no doubt that Trump is a racist. And yet he's wavering on this because, like any other politician, he is susceptible to pressure from political actors, mostly from his own side, but also from the Democrats.
Sometimes you gotta be
that's
pragmatic.
all I want to say, man. I appreciate the show. Dissident Peasant Podcast. You guys check it out.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate the call.
Can't always be about idealism.
I try and live each day like it's my last. And I honestly, I don't even think he knows where he is.
Right, yeah.
Like, I don't even think, like, I'm like increasingly convinced that
like, it's like if Dinesh came in and told him actually the Democrats are the real racists, the worry is Trump would just say, well, maybe I should just be a Democrat then.
Wait a second, really? That's where I want to be if I'm a racist?
We control all the black people?
Hold on. Wait, what's the thing I get to control the plantation? I'll do that. I'll do that one. That's the one I want. Plants on fire. Hey, MR crew. Oh, I already said that. Creamy dripping center. What Bernie is doing is a mistake. Climate change is vastly more important. Hiking the earned income tax credit or doing an MBI is more important. We can build upon the successes of Obamacare while spending this valuable capital on other vital progressive causes. It's ripping the Democratic Party up, taking every single penny of political capital and betting it an overhaul. It's selfish, short-sighted, and in the end will not be successful. Obamacare should be shored up. Democrats should focus on jobs, green infrastructure to create them, and building other areas of the social safety net, such as the EITC or MBI. I have seen that suggestion. The hilarious part about that complaint is those same people, I would imagine you're one of them too, suggest that remind us that Bernie's not a Democrat. There is nothing preventing anybody from doing what you're talking about. But assuming you are conceding the fact that Bernie is the most inspiring politician on the left in this country presently, which you must be, Because otherwise you'd be saying, hey, what's wrong with blankety blank? That they are not leading a charge to do something different. And yet they're giving Bernie a completely open field to do whatever he wants. So you are conceding that he is the politician with the most energy, and you're just mad that he's not doing it the way you want him to do it. He's doing it the way that's been successful for him. Now, that's one thing to note. The other thing to note is that right now, the next step in healthcare is going to be shoring up Obamacare. And instead of there being nothing from the Democratic Party, except for, let's say, increasing subsidies, making a law that you can't offer an insurance plan in a state without offering one on the exchange, or perhaps like let's say just Brian Schatz's plan. Just if Brian Schatz's plan, which Bernie has signed on to, was the outermost margin of what the Democrats were offering, where do you think this would land? So if you are genuinely interested in shoring up Obamacare, there is nothing that is going to help your cause more than the fact that 17 Democrats, or caucusing, people who caucus with the Democrats, is now calling for a single-payer system. Because what that means is the center of gravity in this debate has moved significantly to the left, and that anything that is done with Obamacare now has a directive of not just short-term patch, but they're going to be thinking, we need to head this off at the pass. And the pass is going to be a much more progressive and effective patch for Obamacare, which Bernie has repeatedly stated he would also seek, at the very least, by co-sponsoring Brian Schatz's bill. So this complaint is bullshit. It's bullshit. There is no, and here's the thing, there is no subsidiary positions on climate change. The Democratic Party has a position on climate change. And I don't know what the concern is. I don't understand what the opportunity cost is perceived here. If Medicare for All is nothing but an incredibly exciting slogan that will get people to come out and vote for Democrats, that's the best thing that can happen to any climate change policy as well. It's stupid. It is a hollow, super hollow criticism. And, you know, I've seen others make it in print, and it's really, it's odd. It's a really odd criticism.
It's definitely not about tearing what he's doing, tearing the party apart either. Because whatever the Medicare for All equivalent in the UBI field or climate change field would be, you'd have the same problems with Democrats not being all on board with his position.
Well, I saw Bill Scher wrote a piece, and I don't have it in front of me. I wasn't going to talk about it, where it said, like, you know, why isn't there something that Democrats can get behind, like education? Someone want to tell me what the Democratic position is on education that is going to bring everybody on board? Are we against charters? What is the official Democratic position on that? Are we talking about an extension of public education through universities? Oh, wait, now we're into the free college or debt-free college debate. What about extending pre-K? The idea that people would complain. I mean, look, you could say, and I've heard the complaints, like, this is not a real policy yet. This hasn't been fully fleshed out. We can't have this in this country because the country will never go for the increase in taxes. Very maybe. But to argue that it is selfish of Bernie Sanders to take a position that has all of this energy and promote it is just simply absurd. It's an absurd. To say that the left is misguided because of what it's excited about is absurd. It's absurd. I mean,
it's concern trolling.
And the thing is that, like, to even equate it with the replace and repeal of Obamacare is also a mistake, because there was no subsidiary position for Republicans with repeal and replace. There was no position down the road to there. They couldn't find a position because there was none. The problem that Republicans had with repeal and replace was not that they promised something that they ultimately didn't deliver. It was that they had no subsidiary, they had no place to retreat to. They had no half measures. And like we say, I mentioned earlier, Bernie Sanders' plan, the Medicare for All plan, has multitudes of half measures, three-quarter measures, 1/8 measures. And because it still has an ultimate goal, there's no disappointment built in. There'll be some, but there's no implicit admission of surrender. So you can go to Medicare buy-in, to Medicare for people age 50 and over, to Medicare for people ages 18 and below. You can go to any variation of those things that I talked about where you wouldn't have the full benefits, to you just have dental, to you just have eye care. I mean, you can increasingly build upon this and still maintain the other goal. So you will never get into a position of the Republicans will repeal and replace. It really is a very, very strange critique, one that seems to ignore certain political realities and blames Bernie Sanders for stumbling upon something. I mean, it's been around for 100 years, 80 years, this idea in American politics that has captured the imagination of Democratic voters. What an odd complaint. Nick from Manitoba. Sam, fascinating interview today. It's got me thinking how you yourself have a monopoly on beta cuck pajama talk. Given the already mentioned consequences of it, we need to break it up by separating the sweater vest from the cargo shorts. Now, all that aside, can you explain what a breakup of Amazon or Google would look like and what that would entail? Well, that would be pretty... I mean, you could simply say you have to. I mean, one way you could do it is this: you simply say to Amazon, you cannot control 80% of every dollar spent online. We're only going to allow 20% of every dollar to be that could go to you. You can figure out which parts of your business you want to shed. That's a perfectly reasonable way of doing it. With Google, it would be you have to decouple your search function from your advertisement. I mean, I can find a guest who will come up with this stuff, but there's literally so many different options that are all, it's really just a question of, is there a will? And then you start to research those different options. But maybe I'll look for someone to talk about that. Stay sweet, MR Beauties. Okajik. Hey, Sam, this past weekend was my 52nd birthday, and I passed my G1 Krav Maga test. It's a black belt. Can I get a shofar? Of course. You can get some of... We know who we're going to hire if we're not security around here. Majority Report, Zach, I think there's a short-term solution to the monopoly hospital problem. Is an all-payer rate setting scheme. You should get Sarah Cliff from Vox to talk about the all-payer rate setting. The biggest problem with Sanders' bill is not addressing supply-side issues. In a scheme with no copays, we'll get a lot more doctor's visits without making more doctors. All scheme, all payer rate. And when can you get Walter Block or another libertarian thinker on the show? And it's been way too long. It's true. Well, I think we're ready to do that again. Ladies and gentlemen, the other day we played, do you have the original? Let's just start. Well, the other day we played a clip of a Owen Schroyer, who refers to himself as the Cuck Slayer, who went to a rally in Austin, Texas, I believe it was, and was interviewing people. And he, after talking to one guy, he turned to talk to a girl who, based upon my guess, would be closer to 11 or 12 years old. 13. That's around the age of my daughter. And here's how the beginning of that conversation went.
How are you, young man?
You're an idiot.
Okay, wait a second.
Who taught you that language?
I'm sorry. Can we dial that back? What did he say? What was his salutation? How are you?
How are you, young man?
You're an idiot.
And she says, you're an effing idiot. And he goes on to take offense. In fact, he made it back into the studio. The Cuck Slayer did. And now he's wearing his jacket and tie and his little lapel pin, as most Cuck Slayers do. And here is his recap with Alex Jones.
Let's play a clip of this young lady last weekend in Austin.
How are you, young man?
You're an idiot.
Wow, who taught you that language?
My mother.
So your mother taught you that foul language?
In the car.
And why am I an idiot? Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh.
And then flicks off the camera.
Looks like about a 9, 10-year-old girl.
Yeah, and I said...
She already, acts basically like just like some thug woman. Like, yeah, I got Inca tattoos on my arms, yeah. I got, how you doing? Running them,
It's kind of like the Trump thing, how they said, like, he was doing this and mimicking somebody that had mental disabilities. They say I said man. I always say ma'am and sir when I do these.
Well, that they lie.
All right, pause it for 1 second. So, in other words, the Cuck Slayer would have us believe that he said, how are you, young ma'am?
That's how I address young women too. Hey, young ma'am.
Hello, young ma'am.
Young madam.
And does he say, how are you, young sir? I am the Cuck Slayer. Young ma'am, young sir, I am the Cuck Slayer. I have traveled far and wide to meet you, young sir. Continue.
Fiction writers in liberal media, and so they have to make it your bad, so you say ma'am, and clearly you say ma'am on the tape, but that's what they do. Well, but notice who they're talking about, Owen. Who are they talking about, Owen?
All right, pause.
Alex.
Now, look, this is the most interesting part to me. He says, notice who they're talking about, Owen. He's sort of smiling and laughing. Notice who they're talking about, Owen. And Owen starts to chuckle. And this is what gives it away, their game, right? Because Alex Jones has been saying to Owen, for the years that Owen's been working for him, the key to this is to do something that creates controversy so they talk about you. That's the only thing that's important in our business. That's why I freaked out when Donald Trump won, because I didn't think I would be able to make as much money. And we are in wrestling. We're pro wrestlers. And it's super important. You want to be the guy. You want to be the guy that at least part of the audience comes to see you because they hate you. So, Owen, I was right. I was right. You know it. That's why you're chuckling. We're both chuckling. So dial it back and watch this again.
Clearly you say ma'am on the tape, but that's what they do. Well, but notice who they're talking about, Owen. Who are they talking about, Owen?
Alex, Let's, if you don't mind, I'd actually like to read some scripture here that I found comfort in last night because I'm serious. This was tough for me, Alex. I've never been character assassinated like this from hundreds of people at once. It was eye-opening to me.
You're telling them, "Help me, I'm weak."
So here's
the Jedi are taking over.
Here's some scripture that I found comforting.
Sorry.
The end of all things is near. This is from Peter, by the way. The end of all things is near. Therefore, be alert and sober of mind so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. We're seeing that right now. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in various forms. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on to test you, as though something strange were happening to you.
Pun intended.
So rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the suffering of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. But there were also false prophets among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you.
Is he admitting
they will
that
secretly introduce destructive heresies,
fraud?
even denying the sovereign Lord who brought them, bringing swift destruction of themselves. Many will follow their depraved conduct and will bring the way of truth in disrepute.
And that's what's happening is the story isn't some kids flipping you off. All of them cuss, all of them scream, all of them are hateful, none of them can talk, and they celebrate small children acting like, you know, they're like some woman that's running a meth lab or something. I mean, I'm not saying a little girl does that, but I mean, she's like, come on.
Because I can't afford to get fired. I can't afford to get sued again by Chobani and the back door. Oh, and incidentally, today, the reading of the scripture that had absolutely nothing to do with what we were talking about, gold, pure gold. What did I tell you, right? Did I tell you this? When you came back with that tape, did I not say, this is going to be great, and I want you to pretend like you said, young ma'am, okay? Because we've got it. We've got everything we need here. We got the young kid. What did I tell you? Pets and young kids. If you can get them in a video flipping you off. And on top of that, an opening to read scripture. Okay? And also the aggrievement. The aggrievement from a woman. She's a girl, but you could still say you're aggrieved by others. We've hit the trifecta. You're going to, believe me, wait till you see what happens to your Twitter account.
Owen's much better at that than Mike Cernovich is, for instance.
That's the other thing. And part of why I wanted to play that is I feel bad for Cernovich because when you see Owen there, who's a natural, right? I mean, Owen's a real natural. He knows he's going to whip out I wish he had memorized, frankly, the scripture. That would have been better. But
that's Glenn Beck level.
Yeah. But Cernovich has got to watch something like that and just turn to his wife and just be like, what can I do? Sweetheart, you can't just keep making these periscopes that are going nowhere. You've just got to practice. Just practice. Let's run it again. I think that's happening in the Cernovich home.
She was talking about coaching him.
Do you think it's possible that, like, right now, she's like, Mike, I have printed out. And now, of course, she speaks much quicker than I do. That might be a regional thing, or I don't know what. But she speaks with a lot more urgency and quickness than I do.
Whatever they're doing, I'm sure it's urgent.
Right. And they could be acting out. Like, she could have written out the transcript of that piece, and they could act it out again. And this is how you would do it differently, Mike. So
let the video play.
Let the video play. Let's practice this. You not hearing an ounce of silence and then jumping in. Can we practice that? Jones 5:5. Blessed are the alpha males, for they shall slay the cucks. Calling from a 330 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Richard calling from Ohio.
Hello, Richard from Ohio. What's on your mind?
Well, Sam, I think you guys have just gone down the wrong path today. I think you missed the big story. And the big story is pretty straightforward. It's about the death of Grant Hart and how I feel about it.
Well, did you hear the music that we played going into...
Yes.
Okay.
I did indeed. In fact, I tracked that down on that album. That was his last full album, and it's a bummer that he's dead.
That
now,
song is pretty haunting, I think.
It is. Most of his songs are haunting, obviously. And I have a request of you and Matt, and then I'll move off the air because I know you got more important things to talk about. But one was, I don't know if you guys have ever considered playing the Mekons in your between during your breaks, because they're both politically extremely progressive and B, really pretty fabulous. So if you haven't done that, I've been listening for about 2 years now, and I don't think I've ever heard of Mekons.
Matt, do you remember the Mekons? No, right?
No.
No, he doesn't.
Are they recent or they're older?
No. They were.
They're both.
Are they
They're
recent?
still around.
Oh wow, I didn't know.
They put out an album within the last year.
Is that right?
But they're more hardcore, progressive, socialist tinged rock and roll.
I feel like they were punk. They were punk.
Yeah, they were first wave British punk, but they've been around ever since. I mean, it's worth keeping them in the back of your brain for future consumption. And then I'll just ask you actually to talk for a minute about Grant Hart, because I'll hang up, but I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about Husker Du and Hart.
I only know his work through Husker Du. I mean, there's not a lot to say. I don't have a lot of depth when it comes to music, to be honest with you. Husker Du was one of those bands that I was, I think probably introduced me to the Replacements, and that was the time where I would go and see music, and so. That was just my ilk of music that I used to listen to constantly, and Husker Du in particular, I used to listen to constantly. But I was never, my depth when it comes to cultural things is pretty limited. So all I can tell you is I was just conscious of the fact that he passed away, and Husker Du was a big part of my mid-youth, not early youth, but youth. That's it.
Yeah, well, no, that's a valid. The reason I was thinking about him after you mentioned his death was because when I got fired from my first job, I think I went home that night and got loaded and listened to "Flip Your Wig" about 90 times on as loud as my stereo could go. So it brought back sad but good memories.
Yeah.
And I thank you for letting me excavate them on national podcast. This isn't radio. What the hell is it anyway?
Internet.
Probably
radio.
4 people are listening to this.
Well, a few more. But I
Thanks
appreciate
a lot.
it. All right. 4 people? Really?
1,284 on YouTube alone.
Petrus, The Wall. Trump needs to get with Thiel. I have heard he has a fabulous eye for color and texture. Mexico needs to understand that all design options are on the table. On the wall. I love Sarah Palin. I think the right is starting to signal a little uncertainty on getting tax cuts passed. Yeah, you think? Oh, yeah. Do you have that clip from me on Hayes? I was on Hayes. We'll play this tomorrow, maybe, if we can track it down. But I was on Hayes last night, and they had that woman. I've been on the air with her before, and she's not straightforward. Is that fair enough to say? She was a former Grover Norquist lackey. And the amazing thing is he was trying to, talk to her about tax cuts. Now, what is the line of tax cuts? Matt, you're young, but you're knowledgeable. What has been the classic line about Republicans and tax cuts for 35 years?
Don't raise taxes ever and only cut taxes.
But what happens when you cut taxes on rich people? What does that do?
Oh, growth.
Yeah, growth. And then what happens with the growth?
It trickles down.
It trickles down. Yeah, it showers down from above, like wealth, gold. It's like a golden shower. And the trickle down. And so that has been the mantra. You want growth? You got to cut taxes on the rich, the makers. And she would not say this. She would only say, we need tax reform. We need tax reform to simplify things so that the elite can't figure out how to not pay taxes, which is fascinating. I mean, I don't think most viewers would have caught on to that. They would just caught on like, she's being weirdly evasive, but it wouldn't occur to them except for this notion of like, what? Like, even they know their normal tax cutting argument is completely toxic. Now, granted, she's coming on MSNBC where, you know, watching Crusades, where presumably you have a lot of sort of left of center people looking who aren't going to buy it. But that's, you know, that's their argument, and they can't even make it. Ted Cruz went on Fox yesterday to reiterate that they don't want the cuts to be revenue neutral. I don't think the Tea Party is going to go along with it under any circumstances because compromise is for people who are wrong. Tea Party and their rigidity may save us again. What a weird time we're in, indeed. And Attorney Andrew, can you help me understand Sherrod Brown's position on Bernie's Medicare for All bill? Yes, I may need to read the rest of your thing. You say Brown's official statement says he supports Medicare for all in principle, but wants to focus on lower Medicare to 55. That's the Brian Schatz thing, and a Medicare buy-in. If the point of not co-sponsoring Medicare for all is to avoid that issue in 2018, why say you support it in principle? Because the ad of like, Sherrod Brown has put up a bill to go to government-run healthcare versus Sherrod Brown says he's interested in government-run healthcare in principle is just not as dramatic. And I think it's his way of being able to say, people, that the idea is that he wants to make Medicare to 55 and Medicare buy-in is more proactive on part of the consumer / citizen, right? If I want a Medicare buy-in, that's up to me. That's choice. If you don't want to go on Medicare at age 55, you can get private insurance if you want. And then, you know, and I don't think a lot of people, frankly, I don't think you're going to find too many 50-year-olds or 45-year-olds are going to go, I don't want Medicare at 55. I want to wait until 65. Do you remember how long ago it was that the Democratic position was we should be talking about raising Medicare to 67? I mean, 5 or 6 years ago?
I feel like I did a debate on this in high school where those were the options, like, how do we fix this problem? And I think I remember my group coming up with, like, let's just raise it 1 year every 2 years. Sorted.
That's, I had Jonathan Alter on this program 6 years ago. That was the debate we had. Any Republican will take that statement and say he supports Medicare for all anyways. Is it to save face on his previous statements regarding ACA that it's not government health care and that it's good? No, I think it really has to do with he thinks that is going to be a position that's going to be easier for him to defend in a debate or out there. I think he knows, like, look, I'm not going to convince a bunch of people, but I need to maintain the people I have. And the people I have and have voted for me will listen to my explanation. That's my guess. Sam, since you don't want to talk about Hillary, may I ask you to discuss McConnell's decision to no longer abide by the blue slip? I mentioned that at the top of the show. I don't think he's made that position. I don't know if you heard me at the beginning of the show or you read my tweet, but I know where this is going. So I'm in Chicago, in the Sears Tower specifically, and you will not believe how much water escapes Lake Michigan when the effing moon crashes in. I literally tweeted that out to Jimmy Dore today.
You know, I voted for the candidate who had a Green New Deal, so I feel proud of myself about that.
We got to cut up the Lake Michigan stuff. Grilling with Gorka. You guys should check out Greg's hour-long video of him shirtless talking into his camera about how libertarians and progressives should just get along. I got to assume
I'll
that's
put
a
that in
joke.
my watch later.
Nick the Liberal, George Monbiot has it exactly backwards. It's not rents that are so much out of control in most markets. It's wages that are clearly decades behind the curve. So the solution might involve a small-scale decrease in rents and very large increase in wages. Thames Darwin, please someone explain to E. Greg that Pinochet didn't lead a revolution. He staged a coup. Kelly, what's your name? Your number. Michael is a 7, so he shouldn't talk. Trump told me he only finds Michael attractive after he looked in the sun for at least 10 seconds. P.S. I volunteer for E. Greg for your libertarian sparring debate part. No. Really cool. From Business Insider, on ABC's View the Wednesday, Clinton repeated her argument when asked whether Sanders voters were right to be disillusioned by the Democratic National Committee's covert support for Clinton over Sanders. Sanders is not a Democrat, and it's implied that it's reasonable the DNC would have supported her candidacy over hers. Well, I mean, the DNC says it's not supposed to do that. Ben, I'm as working class as it gets. I come from a real Indiana working class family. My father was a real Hoosier daddy. Used to come home and yell, "Bend over, Junior, look up and clean your room." That's how I became the man I am today. Chappie, I'm retired with a pension, which makes me an elite. However, I retired from the Postal Service, which I believe is a blue-collar job. Rob Cully, don't forget to tell us about your Twitter exchange with that Peter douche or Random Rush. I'm milking cows and listening live, then again on the podcast during the morning milking in the UK. I think Schumer just went in there and said, "Hey, Don, your hotels need that cheap Mexican labor." I like it, Chuck. They can stay. Jay Tingle, are we to believe that a podcast can be heard above the din in the milling department of a machine shop? I've worked in plenty of factories, and it was difficult to identify what song was playing on the radio. Fix that, and you'll have 4 more listeners. You have 1,004 on YouTube alone. I find YouTube to be off-putting for a plethora of reasons. That must mean you have 100,000 live streaming the audio, so dude can suck it. Moshi, I'm a butcher. My wife is a baker. My son is a candlestick maker. Taiwan, I live in Taiwan where the healthcare is great. Hope I can be great to my family in U.S. one day. Taiwan Tommy. And sometimes try. Hey, Sam, I'm positively working class, work at a manufacturing company surrounded by conservative white dudes. I became a father very young and had to start working right away. But while I don't have a degree, I've made a point to educate myself. I wish others without a college degree would do the same thing. We might not have gotten into the same situation we're currently in. Don88, what's your thoughts on California trying to move their primary up further in the primary season in order to help Kamala Harris in the next presidential election? I actually think that it might be pretty good for California to do this, although I need to think about it more. Put aside Kamala Harris for a moment. The California, on some level, reflects more of sort of, I guess, democratic values. The only problem is, of course, that you can win California and the national vote by an extraordinary amount and still lose the Electoral College. I'd be much more for it if we had national popular voting. Let's put it that way. I think there's a pretty good argument that maybe you need to put a Pennsylvania, a Michigan, a Wisconsin closer to the front. But these, states make their own decisions. But I need to think about it more, to be honest with you, because I haven't really paid too much attention about it. Loki4191, hey, Sam, the German election is a week from Sunday, and I was wondering if you'd be covering it at all. I'm curious about the state of the left since Merkel is part of the center-right. Thilo Jung seems like a good source, and he covers a host of other issues in the Majority Report's wheelhouse as well. I'll look that guy up. Maybe we'll do that. That seems like a Michael in Michael's portfolio. Kevin 11721, Trump pushed into the ample bosoms of Chuck and Nancy. The DX fool. Hey, hi, YouTube. Ben Shapiro is supposed to speak at UC Berkeley today. You may recall that he once sued Katie Tur's gender parent for assault after she touched him on Dr. Drew's old headline news talk show. And he once told students at Yeshiva University that trans people, like fellow conservative Caitlyn Jenner, were delusional and that Jews shouldn't donate to charity because it goes against the Talmud. Lauren had a juggaloo buddy who sprayed painted the Hatchet Man on a police building while in Florida, Arizona, and a few weeks after that it was announced ICP was put on the FBI gangs list. His juggalo family blamed him for this and completely abandoned him.
Oh.
Wow. Wow, I don't even know how to... That's crazy.
More juggalo lore.
Chris Lapaco, I must have missed something. Did Cory Booker really just ask why drug prices are so high? Did Noam Combs let him get away with that? He voted against drug reimportation in January. This is 2017. Am I really here? Is time dilating or diluting? I'm so confused right now. Well, you know, his argument is we need to have the proper, you know, when he came back on that, that was we need to have the proper safety. But that's why she asked that question. Social Jewish Warrior. I'm sick and tired of Clinton supporters accusing people who are critical of her book tour of misogyny. Whenever this happens, people overlook the actual misogyny. Hillary has every right to do a book tour, and I have every right to say she's acting like a delusional narcissist. She seriously thinks she won the primary in a landslide. She won by 3 million votes. Clintons need to just stay away from politics. I mean, I don't... She did win the primary by a pretty significant margin. Off the top of my head, I don't know what the thing is, but I also what the where it fits historically. But she has every right to have a book tour. What I take issue with is that she's trying to sell books and she by sowing dissent in the Democratic Party or amongst the left, frankly. Even if Bernie is not a Democrat, he has a lot of Democratic supporters. And I am told that she's not running for office. And so the future of the Democratic Party is not going to be in her hands. And she seems to be being a little bit careless with it. Censor sweep. Mr. Raygun should be proud of his podcast. It's really great. I agree. I don't know why he does that. Great leap forward. Hi, Sam. Chris Hayes reported last night that you're 67. Is this true or more libtard fake news? Sorry, but the IMR is wrong about healthcare ripping the Democrats apart. Obama didn't run on Obamacare. He ran on a universal healthcare. Do we think Democrats and progressives would win on spending money on climate change? Umar Shami. I think there's value for progressive voice to state some fundamental values like condemning preemptive physical violence, even if you don't shout it from the rooftops in the cases where the target is a Nazi. Also, there's value in stating such condemnation and saying Nazis are still worse to make it clear there's no equivalency. I can see myself performing such an act when faced with screaming Nazis, and I'd be wrong. If you agree with the view that Nazi attitude represents an implicit imminent physical threat, do you not see a glaring slippery slope danger? Well, theoretically, perhaps it's possible that one would move on from Nazis to, Trump supporters to where there would be a massive Antifa that had mutated into liberal thuggery that would try and...
American Maoists or something.
Yes, where we would put all the right-wingers into camps. However, we have never had that type of leftist. I mean, yes, we've had isolated instances, Weather Underground, let's say.
Individual is.
Well, Weather Underground, but we've never had any significant movements that where there has been protracted violence on the left, particularly in an ever increasingly large circle of people. Whereas we have a lot of examples of that on the right in this country. I'm talking about in this country. So theoretically, it could be slippery slopey because just about everything can be. But I think if the limiting principle is punching Nazis, then I think you're in pretty good... I think your concerns are overblown. There may be some other issues, but I think your concerns are overblown. Ryan Tennant, disagree. Trump's responding to pressure from the left. He's mad at McConnell and Ryan. Yes, I think that's true, too. I think that's true. And Chuck and Nancy recognize this and have taken to whispering sweet nothings in his ear while he's vulnerable. I think that's true. I think this is really like, there's less of an analog in our political history and more in my daughter's sixth grade year in junior high, to be totally honest with you. I really do think. 814, you're calling from an 814 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Greg from the North Coast. Saw you on that Hayes interview last night, and her smirk and that laugh seems to be contagious among the right now. So I think her smirk was a tell. What I'm really calling it about is I'm sort of at ground zero where there's this that healthcare interview you had earlier, where we have for years we had two hospitals, all right? One of them merged in with a massive hospital chain from Pittsburgh, who later was gobbled up by an insurance company, and then an insurance company gobbled up the other hospital, and so now we have basically two competing hospital and insurance companies combined competing against each other. And doctors have privileges. So in this new world, these doctors are nothing but contractors. They get poached from each other's systems, much like baseball players get poached. And you can have a doctor one year where he's fine, he does everything you need, and then the next year you find he's off to another whole insurance system and hospital system where they're not in your group. And it's so confusing anymore that it's just turned into chaos. And the thing that I'm noticing, because I'm intimately connected with the hospitals around here, due to friendship and marriage and also just using them a lot. And their new thing is concierge care. And not only that, Sam, they're doing it around the world.
And concierge care is like, is that like when you put them on a retainer, essentially? Is that it?
Pretty much. They're also building basically almost hotels on their campuses for people who can afford that type of care. Not only that, Sam, their retired executives are going around the world attempting to establish these hospitals in other areas. So you'll see, and if I can name one, UPMC in Italy. You'll see UPMC in South America. I know this for a fact. I talk to them, and that's what's going on. That's their next step to deal with this. I think they've basically figured out that they're in trouble, and that basically, like you said, it's single provider meet single insurer, and they're trying to figure a way to accommodate all that. But I went through a cancer issue and had to have these two hospitals talk to each other. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. Their whole computer systems don't talk to each other. So as a consumer, I have to carry my MRIs around. I have to carry my X-rays around. I have to carry so much documentation around if I want to go between the two systems, let alone move from where
I'll tell you something.
At one of the major centers, which are located in the major cities. So I sought care in a major center, and I was completely on my own at that time going through a cancer issue when I lost my PCP, who suffered a medical condition that rendered him unable to work anymore. So I've been through this chaos, and it's crazy. I know when you talked about that bill you got and being called by a collection agency and you had to backtrack, I've got bills that I have to work out being my own advocate because the doctors have changed phone numbers and the insurers are lazy and they'll only call the old phone number and they don't know how to, basically, I guess, don't know how to track this new doctor down, the doctor's new phone number down.
Yeah, it's
not only, I mean, it's
system's
absolutely nuts.
Our system's a mess.
It is.
Well,
so I really appreciated that interview today.
Well, thanks for the call.
Thanks, Sam. I hate to bring in the bad news.
No,
but...
I got you. I mean, our system's a mess. And that issue of hospitals not talking to each other, I came upon this when my dad, we were dealing with his hospitalization for a while, and they couldn't get records they needed because from another doctor. I was like, well, I don't understand. Well, what do you mean you can't get them? Can't they email? No, can't get them. And it occurred to me, like, somebody should start some type of, like, Dropbox for your medical stuff, honestly. Like, you get them from this place, and I don't know. Folks, you'll recall several, what was this, about a month ago, maybe, right? Maybe 2 months ago. Louise Linton, she is the newlywed wife of Steve Mnuchin, who is the Treasury Secretary / guy who should have been prosecuted for foreclosure, systemic foreclosure fraud. Treasury Secretary. So Louise Linton, disembarking from a U.S. government plane. You can tell it's a U.S. government plane because it says United States of America on it. It's a little jet.
Usually a good sign.
Little jet. I don't know how big of a jet that is, but significant size. And they're coming back, and she writes, great hashtag day trip to hashtag Kentucky, hashtag nicest, hashtag people, hashtag beautiful, hashtag countryside. I guess she tags it. I mean, she's pretty good at this. She's Instagram. And then she has tags for all of the clothes she's wearing. And I guess on Instagram, you can actually like associate it with clothes. So it's like Roland Moray pants, hashtag Tomford Sunnies, hashtag Hermes scarf, hashtag Valentine rocket stud heels, hashtag Valentino, hashtag USA. And so Jen Miller, 29, some user found that to be a little obnoxious. And so she wrote, glad we could pay for your little getaway, hashtag deplorable. And then Louise Linton responds, did you think this was a personal trip? Adorable. Do you think the U.S. government paid for our honeymoon or our personal travel? LOL. She goes on to say, have you given more to the economy than me and my husband? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then she starts to actually mock this lady's kids and this and that. I know you're mad, but deep down you're really nice, and so am I. Sending me passive-aggressive Instagram comment isn't going to make life feel better. Maybe a nice message, one with filled wisdom and humanity. Have a pleasant evening. Go chill out and watch the new Game of Thrones. It's fab. So that was a couple of months ago. And
actually, August 22nd.
Oh, really? Jeez, time is dilated. So that was about a month ago. And today, this little gem popped up in the newsies. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin requested government jet for European honeymoon. Secretary Steve Mnuchin requested the use of a government jet to take him and his wife on their honeymoon in Scotland, France, and Italy earlier this summer, sparking an inquiry by the Treasury Department's Office of Inspector General, sources tell ABC News. Officials familiar with the matter say this is a highly unusual ask. A U.S. Air Force jet costs $25,000 per hour to operate. It was put in writing by the Secretary's office, but eventually deemed unnecessary after further consideration by Treasury Department officials. His trip, from which that Instagram post was from, has already triggered a review of his travel. The Inspector General is reviewing whether or not he improperly used that trip to catch a prime view of the solar eclipse with his wife, Louise Linton. Now, Mnuchin's office denied that the trip was to watch the eclipse. He said he was there to attend meetings on tax reform. And the Treasury Department said the Mnuchins would reimburse the government for Linton's travel costs. So just the wife's travel costs will be reimbursed, not Mnuchin's. Incidentally, there's pictures of Mnuchin with Mitch McConnell, who tweeted a photo of them watching the eclipse together, complete with the proper eyewear. And that the Treasury Department completely denies that his decision to visit Kentucky on that day at that time was in any way a function of the so-called path of totality, which was headed over Kentucky to look at the eclipse. There's the two of them. Yeah, in front of the bullion depository at Fort Knox. You know, where they have all the tax reform meetings. A spokesman for the Treasury Department told ABC News that the secretary requested government travel for his honeymoon out of a concern for maintaining a secure method of communication.
Terrorists. Because
how else could he communicate? Like an encrypted phone? No, you're always going to want the airplane, which you carry around with you, apparently. Like, he couldn't go to the embassy in France because we don't have an embassy in France. Or he couldn't go to the embassy in Scotland. Or he couldn't go to the embassy in Italy or any of the annexes. He needs to go to the airport where the plane would be stored to communicate. Because, you need to be in a because the Treasury Secretary is involved in so many of those national security issues. Aside from the president and the vice president, ABC writes, travel on military aircraft is typically reserved for cabinet members who deal directly with national security, such as secretaries of defense and state. One senior Treasury official who's worked with a number of past secretaries said that military aircraft are only used in extreme circumstances.
Not honeymoons?
Not honeymoons. Such as if the secretary had to be rushed back to a meeting in Washington, D.C. with the president. I want to go on my honeymoon, but if I need to rush back. If suddenly there's an outbreak of tax reform that was unpredicted. So, wow, man. Now, I think what happened here is Mnuchin, obviously wanted to do the honeymoon on the cheap, even though he's a multi-millionaire who made millions of dollars by improperly foreclosing on people's homes.
You mean giving to the economy?
Right, giving to the economy. And he was too cheap to pay for a flight. And he didn't tell his wife because he's too embarrassed. And now she's found out. So she got a little bit faced. I think her Instagram account is going to be shut down for a little bit longer than she thought.
I'm surprised the whole I wanted to use the government jet as basically a phone booth excuse didn't work better for him.
No, didn't. Apparently couldn't sell that. They were like, you could just take a cell phone, an encrypted cell phone. No, okay, that's one way of doing it. All right, final call of the day. Calling from a 707 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is Logan. I'm calling from Sonoma, California.
What's on your mind, Logan?
Hi, so I've been calling. I've been thinking about this for a while. It'd be cool to see if you could have somebody come on the program and talk about the foreign policy implications of climate change. I don't think a lot of people connected as much to the amount of war and famine and movement that's going to be happening throughout the world.
Yep.
And I think, we talk a lot about ice caps melting and sea level rise and stuff like that. And I think it's hard for people to conceptualize. I think it's hard for people to really kind of, feel it as much. So I think that'd be something to focus on. The other thing is totally unrelated or separate issue, but I'd like to encourage people, especially who live in small towns, Sonoma's a really small town, to get involved and get engaged in their communities as much as possible. I've been starting to fight a lot more for affordable housing in Sonoma, and it's a thing that plagues basically the entire Bay Area, but it's a issue that touches pretty much everything. Things like income inequality, things like immigration, things like climate change are all touched by affordable housing. And, there's other local issues as well. So as much as you can get involved in your local community, and you'll find those local governments are often, at least in my local government, they're relatively reactive to issues that you start to bring up.
Good point. Appreciate the call. We'll look into that guest.
Cool.
Thanks. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, folks, no more calls. And let's take 4 more IMs. Modern Times. Fighting for universal health care is selfish. From the bottom of my heart, F you. Wooden Computers. Hey, Sam, with Bob's Burgers back in October, can we expect to see more or less or the same amount of Hugo? I've done 2 already for this upcoming season, I think. So I get 2 decent Hugos. Colin Doucet. Sam, what are your overall thoughts of Season 7 of Game of Thrones? And what do you know about the radioactive waste controversy with Bernie? I don't know anything about that. Game of Thrones Season 7? Not a huge fan. Particularly the last couple episodes. Just too facile. Just too, well, I don't want to do any spoiler. I just thought, they were okay. I they were action-y, but there was some stuff I just thought was just it's not, even the plotting is not even that good. And the characters just sort of seem to be just placeholders now. I don't know.
I'm sort of checked out of it. They explain jokes too much on that show. With 1 or 2 extra lines. There's a thing from the first episode if people want me to challenge me on that. But
the first episode of the whole show?
It happens a number of times, but it's always the example I can cite because I can find
What
it.
is it?
I need to go back and see it, but
All right, we'll
they
do
just
that.
2 extra lines of dialogue.
Maybe we'll do
don't
that
need to be there.
tomorrow. Those 2 extra lines that always kill you. Johnny Tran, Peter Dow sucks. That's all. Miko. I, too, am a working class, dedicated listener, and so are my 32 coworkers. Demographic mid-20s, 30s. Give or take 25% of my college dropouts. All right, well, I'm not going to do he really goes through this, or she goes through all this. All are left of Clinton and for Bernie. Granted, we're in Cali, so take that last bit with a grain of salt, but y'all are definitely working class, younger listeners. By the way, Bernie's not tearing the Dem party apart. He's forcing old school Dems to accept the future and switch to the new paradigm that's inevitable. Can't stop progress. People who are still making that Bernie's not a Dem argument are missing the point. They need to get over it and get on board. I wonder how many shops are listening to this. We don't have a sense of how many listeners we have. Because it could be a multiple of 10. And we got a leaky ship. We better. And the final I am of the day. Ineffable 27. Fun half. All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds